So there are disparities everywhere in American society and around the world, and there would and will be such disparities as long as human beings roam the earth, and there is no reason to expect otherwise. Let me give you a few examples. In 2012, out of the 100 top-ranked marathon runners, 68 were Kenyans. The National Spelling Bee has had an Indian American as the winner for 7 consecutive years. Despite being greatly outnumbered by Black Americans and slightly outnumbered by Black Americans in terms of earning bachelor's degrees, Asian Americans received more than twice as many bachelor degrees in engineering as Blacks. Moreover, Asians outnumber Blacks despite the fact that they are vastly outnumbered by Blacks in the general population. They outnumber them at MIT 3-1, 10-1 at Harvey Mudd College, and 40-1 at Caltech. But even this, as Thomas Sowell points out, was not as great as the disparity between Chinese and Malays earning engineering degrees in Malaysia in the 1960s. Students from the Chinese minority in Malaysia, maybe 5% of the population, earned over 100 times as many engineering degrees as students from the Malay majority. And this is in a country where Malays dominate the government and they dominate university policy. So as Sowell says, there are grossly uneven and non-random outcomes from all sorts of purposeful human endeavors. Moreover, serious laws and policies are based on these assumptions that we should expect everything to be equal in defiance of the facts. The Malaysians have never, or I beg your pardon, the Chinese minority in Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, Vietnam, and Thailand have never operated under an equal playing field, and yet most of those nations' total investments in key industries are held by this Chinese minority. The Chinese minority has had twice the average income of the Malay majority, despite the fact that they've been officially discriminated against. The Italians in Argentina have outperformed native Argentines despite discrimination. The same could be said for Jews, Armenians, East Indians, and more. In the United States, Japanese Americans were so discriminated against that some of them were put into special camps during World War II. And yet, in spite of the temptation to use this as an excuse for poor performance, by 1959, Japanese American households had equaled white households in income, and by 1969, were earning 1/3 more. So there are a lot of disparities, and there are disparities that are the opposite of what you would expect if the narrative of political correctness were true, that discrimination and oppression must have these sorts of outcomes. Sometimes we have exactly the opposite outcomes because human beings are widely variable and they are in many, many different sorts of circumstances. There are many factors that contribute to various outcomes. It is not, in other words, a comic book. The world is not a comic book in which there is one factor at work and in which everything would be equal if we could just get this one factor just right. Now, what about the so-called gender pay gap? We're told that women earn 77% of what men earn. That is not true. It's true in the most trivial, irrelevant sense imaginable, but it is not generally true. Now, when I was arguing this on Equal Pay Day, they have an Equal Pay Day every year, I was trying to argue this with somebody, and the person actually believes that what's being complained about is that women are earning 77% of what men earn for doing the same work. That is actually not the claim that the gender pay gap people are making. But like with the war in Iraq, where they were glad to let people think Saddam had had a hand in 9/11, even though they didn't have to come out and say that, The gender pay gap people are quite happy for people to believe that the issue is women are earning 77% of what men are earning for doing the same work. That is not the claim. Because in fact, the Equal Pay Act of 1963 already made it illegal for women to earn less for doing the same work. That's not the issue. What they're saying is that if you add up all the hours that women work in all different occupations, and you add up all the hours that men work, and you divide the one into the other, the answer is 77%. So you might ask yourself, well, what kind of jobs do they have? Might that have a little to do with the difference? Do they have different kinds of jobs in general? What are their degrees in? Are women getting degrees in engineering more often than men, or are they getting degrees in education more often than men? Which one pays better? How many hours are they working? Can you believe that's not factored in? That's not even factored in. They say, well, we're dealing with full-time workers. That's an equivocation. Full-time, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, means you work in the vicinity of 40 to 41 hours plus. Or no, I beg your pardon, it's 35 hours now. They now say 35 hours plus means you're working full-time. Well, let's disaggregate those statistics. Let's see how many of those people are working just 35 to 39 hours. 12% of women are working 35 to 39 hours per week. And 5% of men are working 35 to 39. How many are working 41 hours plus? 26% of men are working 41 hours plus. Only 14% of women are working 41 hours plus. So when you factor in the number of hours worked, the so-called 23% pay gap drops immediately to 12%. Just with that one adjustment. Now, how could they not know that, right? That's an obvious lie. Are they that pathetic and uninformed they don't even know the difference in hours worked? They're going to make a big federal case out of this whole thing, and they're not even measuring hours worked? No, I don't believe that. They're obviously lying because they don't care about the facts. They honestly do not care. I remember when I was in academia, year after year, I would say, gosh, I've got all the facts and statistics here. What do they care? What they care about is power. They don't care about these statistics. Now, what's interesting is, we still have a 12% pay gap to account for. But you know what institution in the United States, a very prominent institution, also has a 12% gender pay gap? The Obama White House. Now, they're going to go around and harass private employers all day long about having a 12% pay gap. So it was raised to Jay Carney, well, hey, you guys have a 12% pay gap. How do you account for that? And you know what the answer was? Well, women have different jobs in the White House than men. You don't say. That's the point. All right, well, where's the 12% coming from? Again, there are many possible reasons. But one of them, of course, is the difference in effects on men and women of marriage and childbearing. If a woman expects to be out of the labor force for an extended period of time to raise a family, this automatically rules out certain high-paying occupations where your knowledge would be simply out of date by the time you returned. So there are some high-paying types of careers that are immediately ruled out. Moreover, there are other careers where there are a lot of people packing into them because they're so desirable from the point of view of a woman with children, like education or being a secretary, where you can make hours that are very friendly and family-friendly. So this is entirely benign. These are the ways people sort themselves out. And these particular jobs tend to have lower salaries. But this is not any sinister plot to keep women down. Obviously, if women were only earning 77% of what men earned, every business, you know how razor-thin profit margins are these days? They would drop every man on the payroll in a second and hire women. To get a 23% advantage over your competitors? It's so funny how these same people spend all their time talking about how greedy the private sector is. And they don't stop to realize if they were that greedy and there really were a 23% pay gap, there'd be no male employees. They would all have been fired. Hello? So I cover this in that Bernie Sanders is Wrong book. So there's all these statistics and much more analyzing that is all in there. It's important, by the way, to disaggregate statistics to understand what's really going on. It's not enough to say, well, there must be some discrimination because white PhDs are earning more than black PhDs, or Asian PhDs are earning more. Well, the question would be, what are the PhDs in? Are the PhDs in chemistry, in mathematics, and in engineering, as most of the Asian PhDs are, which these are very high-paying fields? Or at least 50% of black PhDs are in education, which is a notoriously low-paying field. Might this account for the disparity we're seeing? Wouldn't that be a better way to try to think about this than to assume there's a deliberate, hate-filled campaign against black PhDs in the United States? Why would that be your automatic default position, to assume the absolute worst of your fellow human beings?